Hey, everyone. Greetings on this Wednesday night. I'm really happy to be with you and really excited about what I'm doing tonight because what I'm doing is the first of a Substack live show called Outspoken, like my Substack is called Outspoken. So it is a podcast that is every Wednesday night at 7 at this time, 7 Eastern. And I'll see you every Wednesday night live, and I'll be able to take your questions and comments, I believe, and we'll be able to interact live on Substack and streaming to other platforms like X and Getter and so on. So I really want to thank the wonderful people at Substack for giving me this fantastic opportunity and platform, and for bringing my work to a new audience, a different audience, an additional audience, and as well as to my regular readers and followers. And I'm just so thrilled that a technology lets me be in your living room live, globally, and meeting with you in this very immediate way, in this new way. So join me every Wednesday night at 7 Eastern, and we can have a deeper conversation than usual. So I'm going to launch this show with an essay I wrote on my Substack Outspoken called "This Really Happened, One More of the Stories I Wanted Never to Tell." Now, my readers will know, but my new listeners may not know, that the reason I'm writing some of these essays is that I made a promise to God, basically. I tried to strike a deal, and it's because I nearly died last summer in a hospital in upstate New York of sepsis after having had an appendectomy, after having gone into the city during the Canadian wildfires and having inhaled a lot of very toxic smoke. So I was very, very ill, dying. I hadn't eaten for 6 days. No food, no water. I was being, I think, given water intravenously, and I had to have a procedure done to get rid of the sepsis, and they kept losing power at the hospital and pushing, believe it or not, right, and pushing my my operation further and further into the future. And I was, not eating, and not drinking, and getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And finally, the nurses, and it was all like the whole hospital was being run on AI, clearly. I mean, that's a whole other essay I have to write, but none of the nurses was really responsible for me. There was no doctor. I literally didn't see a doctor who was responsible for me the whole time I was there. But AI kept telling the nurses on these little devices that they wore little tiny bits of care, right? So this is very scary because you can do away with someone who's a dissident really just by a snippet of code, altering the protocol. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying it could happen, but also I'm saying the fact that AI was kind of dictating, or just computer-driven protocols were dictating my care, meant that everything was very, very abstracted. And so as I was getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and this desperately needed procedure that was supposed to keep me alive was being pushed further and further into the future, there was really no one whose responsibility it was to keep me alive. That's the bottom line with this set of new technologies in our hospitals. But I knew I was dying. I actually had a near-death experience, not a fabulous near-death experience. I'm reading a book about near-death experiences right now that are really, really fabulous. This was very muted, but I'm grateful for it. I actually, was kind of collapsing into another state of consciousness, and I saw my late father and met with him, on a beach that was like a boundary between the worlds, and everything, he was like much younger, looked great. very healthy, very happy. He was wearing a sweater that I remembered from my childhood, a fisherman's sweater, and khaki pants, the kind he used to wear in the 1950s. And, the trousers, the cuffs were rolled up. He was barefoot. He'd been walking along the beach. And it was like my dad's feet, like literally every little detail was correct. And I hadn't probably seen my dad barefoot for decades, but there he was. And I was able to ask him questions that had been bothering me that I had not been able to ask or had a chance to ask when he was alive on this planet Earth with me. So it gave me a huge amount of closure and healing emotionally. But it was, at one point I asked him, am I staying here? And he's like, no, you have to go back. Right. So, and it was literally pearly. The beach was pearly, that kind of pearly gates thing. It was literally like it faded into fog or mist on the two distances that I could see, the two horizons, but even the water was pearlescent. It was iridescent, really beautiful. Nothing to fear. I was really happy to see my father, but I also remembered thinking when I came back into my body, like, oh, I really don't want to be here. And also like, I just don't have any will to fight. I can't keep fighting for life. I can't do it. I don't have it in me. Just physically, I didn't have it in me to fight for life, and I was hurting too much. And I mean, sepsis, right? You're kind of toxic throughout your whole body. And I remembered thinking, it's very sad that the kids will miss me and that their mom will have passed away at 61, but I can't make it any further than this. So my wonderful husband went to my doctor at another hospital and said, get yourself to where Naomi is, dying basically, and make it happen. And he's been trained by the US military to terrify people. So my wonderful doctor appeared and did insist to the people being driven by AI that they had to get my procedure done, and somehow they got it done. And I began to heal and recover. But as I was kind of about to give up before that happened, I did say, the part of me that remembered how much I loved my family, right? That little flickering part of consciousness, did say to God, if you let me live, like I knew I hadn't written everything God wanted me to write. I knew it. I knew that about myself every day. I knew it. I still know it. Like there's still more I haven't written. And I said, okay. If you let me live, I'll write the things I haven't wanted to write. That was my bargain. Not that I really think anyone can, effectively bargain with God, because probably God has it all figured out anyway. But on the other hand, Abraham bargained with God. Lots of people bargained with God in the Hebrew Bible. So who knows how God takes it. But the bottom line is I recovered, thank God. And I really feel like, as my friend Edward Dowd, the, brilliant commentator on excess deaths and other issues, said, I'm playing with the house's money now. It's a gambling metaphor. Like it's all gravy. It's all extra because I thought I was going to die last year. So having said that, I'm trying to make good on my promise. And so this, what I started to write, I've put it off for a long time, but this is one of the things I wanted never to write. And you'll see that the things I wanted never to write, well, they tend to be things that are so outlandish that they're not supposed to have happened, right? Or also things that are so personal and difficult that they're just, painful and embarrassing to write about. But I do have this sense that, it's my job as a writer to get those onto paper in my lifetime. And especially since I have the second chance to be alive for who knows how long, but certainly longer than I thought when I was dying in the hospital last summer. So this really happened. This is 2 parts, so it's probably going to be a 3-part series. I'm going to read the first part now, and if we have time, I'll read the second part, but probably not. I'll probably read the second part next week, and then the third part 2 weeks from now, unless you get really upset at me because it's a cliffhanger, in which case let me know, and I'll read it. I'll read the second part earlier than that. All right. This really happened. One more of the stories I wanted never to tell. I promised, after having nearly died in a hospital the summer before last, to write the things I wanted never to write. I've almost kept my promise, but there are a few stories left unspoken that catch in my throat. This is one of them. You, dear reader, remember our beloved little dog, the late Mushroom. He joined our family when I had recently become a single mom with 2 small children, that most vulnerable, most raw, most wary of identities, that state most in need of a friend and a protector. Mushroom stayed with us for 18 years. Companion, guardian, cranky black and white angel, fluffball, comforter, peevish, silent commentator on events. Loki, our new pup, is a freshly minted baby spirit. Hey everyone, it's Naomi Wolf, and I have a message. President Trump is in the process of what he calls draining the swamp. But many in the MAGA movement and the MAHA movement are asking if he'll expose the entire pandemic. There's enough public evidence for people to be concerned who injected themselves in what has turned out to be a massive experiment. If you were compelled to get the shot for work, travel, maybe you just trusted the system, check out this natural solution formulated by hero doctor Peter McCullough in collaboration with the Wellness Company. They just leveled up their original detox formula, and it costs $30 less. We are introducing the 3-in-1 Ultimate Spike Detox. It's now conveniently consolidated into a single capsule with 4 times more nattokinase, 500 milligrams of bromelain, and 500 milligrams of turmeric root extract. Nattokinase, an enzyme researched for its anti-clotting effects, may work to break down spike proteins. Combined with bromelain and curcumin, it provides a potent blend for detoxification and cellular support. Crafted with 100% natural ingredients, Ultimate Spike Detox is backed by research. It offers effective support for your cell's natural repair and recovery. Experience the only formula approved and used by Dr. Peter McCullough, a top freedom-fighting doctor who risked it all to bring you the truth. Head over to dailyclouthealth.com and use the code DailyClout to get 10% off. Plus free shipping. Again, that's dailyclouthealth.com and use the code DailyClout to get 10% off and get back to that pre-COVID feeling. He wriggles, barely able to contain himself, and is agog with the wonder of everything on earth. Mushroom, on the contrary, was like an elderly Edwardian uncle who reads the paper in a dressing gown and slippers and gazes upon the scene with a jaded eye. You can barely escape Loki's puppy hugs and kisses, but one had to patiently seek out a cuddle from Mushroom. It would be a fulfilling moment when he condescended to lay his wiry head upon your knee, or his preferred move, to curl up, lying half on your lap and half on the keyboard of the laptop, blocking the screen on which the family was trying to watch a movie. Mushroom always had a bit of a metaphysical role, I felt, in our family's life. He always seemed like an irascible, chunky, treats-seeking gift from God, a small, warm, scruffy being whose job from the start seemed to be to make sure that no one in our household would ever be too lonely, too sad, or too overwhelmed. You already know that when Mushroom died at last here in the woods, something happened that we could not, still cannot possibly explain. I described it in my essay, What is a Miracle? A perfect long-stemmed red rose appeared floating in the river by our house in the depths of winter as Mushroom lay dying. And I linked to this essay, which you can read on my Substack, Outspoken. That rose stayed perfect, unmoving, hovering an inch or two under the surface of the ice-clear rushing waters for days. It remained suspended through the day that Mushroom died, and it lingered under the waters, held aloft by nothing for days thereafter. When the rose released its petals at last, what remained behind were two slender tree trunks that had caught themselves on a raised bed of sand within the torrents of the river. These had resolved into the shape of a man-sized cross. And though winter was all around us, a tangle of greenery lay at its cross-section. Looking back, I see that I'd under-narrated the wonder of this. At the time I wrote that essay a couple of years ago, I did not want to tackle the miraculous head-on because, well, all the reasons. People who have advanced degrees, I was raised to believe, are not supposed to experience miracles, let alone to narrate them. The miraculous, I was taught, is in poor taste. But I've changed since then. And that miraculous rose was not the only impossible event that we experienced in relationship to Mushroom. In about 2018, my husband Brian was working as a private investigator for a client who was the leader of a Native American tribe. Brian corrected me, it was 2021. His work took him to the tribe's vast, pristine reservation, which extended for hundreds of acres over the fruit-bearing lowlands and over the regal mountain highlands of Yakima County, Washington State. I visited Brian sometimes while he was working. I'd stay in chain hotels on the outer edge of the reservation and read and write and explore the slightly depressed but still charming downtown of Yakima. I would admire its 1890s train depot turned cafe, the 1940s lettering describing apples and cherries that was still visible on whitewashed brick fruit warehouse walls, the neighborhoods of rundown but still beautiful craftsman bungalows, the town's echoing brick saloons left over from the boom times of the early 20th century. Low black sand hills rise up at the far ends of long, flat avenues. The jail, still in use, stands right in the center of town, almost directly across from the train tracks. Feathery cottonwoods fan a little creek that runs beyond the Target and the Planet Fitness and the parking lots across the flat, tawny dirt, high desert outskirts of the little city. Birds of prey, raptors, cougars, coyotes, and snakes inhabit those flatlands. The fruit in that valley was so abundant that in the summertime, gas stations sold for pennies a pound cherries, plums, apricots, peaches, and strawberries, all so cheap because they were on the very edge of overripeness, so untransportable. In July, Brian and I would buy parcels of golden and then golden red and then later still nearly black cherries wrapped up in newspapers, enclosed in turn in plastic. We'd make a picnic table from the spread out wrappings on the bed of our hotel room as we had no table. We'd unveil and pile up the fruit and admire its glowing colors and eat it as a red sun sank slowly between the low black mountains. On one trip, we decided to drive rather than fly across the country. One reason was so we could bring Mushroom with us. He was very elderly by then, but still a good traveler. Brian liked to take Mushroom out of the car at various truck stops along the way so our little elderly dog could lift his head and smell the air and dirt and grass in different states. And here is a picture of Brian and Mushroom at one of those truck stops. You can see little Mushroom right there. One reader said, with a smiley face. It's not National Geographic, that picture, and it's not, but it was our adventure. On this journey, a colleague of Brian's who lived locally offered us his home. He and his family would be away. We gratefully accepted. We were excited to have a house, so Mushroom and we would be more comfortable. It would be nice to have a kitchen, a living room, a backyard. We made our way to the house on the outskirts of town near the base of the Black Mountains. The area where the pretty, modest, one-story wooden house stood was partly suburban and part desert wasteland. In patches, it was also agricultural. There were a few suburban streets with low ranch-style houses. In empty fields stood battered barns, and there was that tawny sand that seemed to be its own disorienting dimension. The sandy fields seemed to go both everywhere and nowhere. There was something a bit vertiginous about the neighborhood, the air, the perspectives. Dimensions, for example, were hard to judge. Were the mountains moderately high and very close by, or were they vast and very far away? Did the sand stretch for acres or for acres upon acres? Was it burning hot or icy cold or both at once? It all felt a bit surreal. I thought of the Carlos Castaneda books, starting with the teachings of Don Juan about Yaqui shamanism that I had read as a teenager, accounts of places and times in which things changed from the everyday to the surreal and back in a heartbeat, and in which such changes were taken for granted. Something unusual was the menagerie that our hostess, Brian's colleague's young wife, had assembled. The animals were sheltered in a penned area outside the house. We had gone to look at the invitation of our hosts before they had given us the keys and left. There was a spotless miniature red barn with a goat pen and a chicken coop inside. The interior of the goat pen revealed 6 or 7 baby goats, brown, white, and dappled, and a couple of grown she-goats. The baby goats showed off, racing around and leaping in the air. One tiny goat would actually jump on the low divider that separated the goat pen from the yard and balance on its little black hooves for a few moments as if to say, "Look at me." A dozen chickens wandered contentedly about the yard and the chicken coop. Our hostess had shown us how to retrieve warm eggs every morning from under the hay. Another pen housed a well-tended brown pony and a furry white sheepdog who lived together happily year-round. Luckily, we would have no responsibilities for the animals beyond admiring them. A neighbor was feeding them. What was striking was how perfectly sweet and clean everything was. It was like a Disney movie come to life. The animals were all supernaturally cute and tidy and sparkly-eyed, and there were no animal smells and barely any smells of hay or feed. It all seemed a bit inexplicable. Having admired the animals and been shown around the interior of the house, we said goodbye to our hosts and settled in. The house itself was a comfortable American home with nothing unusual about it. There was a master bedroom with a king-size bed and a dresser and TV and 2 kids' rooms full of toys and games. In the living room were 2 brown leather recliners. Another flat-screen TV hung on the wall. There was beige wall-to-wall carpeting, a glass coffee table, and matching glass side tables. A galley kitchen with blue formica edging on white counters was well stocked with pots, pans, appliances, and Tupperware. A brown settee, perfect for after-dinner lounging for 2, stood perpendicular to the kitchen. It looked out over through glass sliding doors to the backyard. The backyard, for its part, was one of the best features of the house. It was a lovely enclosed space about 20 feet by 30 feet. Benches were scattered over concrete patio tiles. There was a picnic table, some herbs in Mexican pots, and a shiny metal barbecue near one wall. The first day and night were uneventful. It was a weekend. We slept well and went for walks and made meals and cleaned up and loaded the dishwasher. We spent a lot of time in the yard, basking in the sunshine. Mushroom enjoyed a rare treat, a large enclosed backyard that was perfectly safe. We lived next to open, bare-inhabited woods in New York, so he was rarely off a leash when we were outdoors at home. Here, though, Mushroom sniffed, free to explore, along the base of the wooden fence. The fence completely sealed the yard away from the desert expanses that surrounded us. I relaxed as I had checked the perimeter carefully, and I knew, and Brian had confirmed, that there was no possibility that Mushroom could get out of the backyard. There were no holes anywhere under the fence. There was no brush obscuring any gap. There was no way at all that a little dog off a leash could be in danger. We had checked the one gate of the fence as well. It opened inward, and it closed with big, black, solid iron sliding bolts. Mushroom spent hours in that backyard with me genially keeping an eye on him. He enjoyed exploring the safe space. He seemed absorbed in the new smells, the feeling of the western sunshine, the distant calling of the desert birds. It was peaceful and secure for all of us. The second night we were there, though, something happened that cannot be understood. Brian and I were lounging on the settee by the kitchen, each of us having had a single glass of wine with dinner. We had let Mushroom out into the backyard for a twilight wander before bedtime. We could keep an eye on him through the sliding glass doors. Out of nowhere, though, a dark wind seemed to envelop us, and out of nowhere, we, who rarely argue, were bitterly arguing. What was it about? I can't even recall. But there was a strange energy suddenly in the room of uncharacteristic harshness and vituperation, awful, unloving things, the kinds of things we never say were said. In the middle of this abrupt biting back and forth, I looked outside. Where is Mushroom? Neither of us could see him. Darkness was descending. I raced into the backyard. Brian ran after me. I will never forget what happened. We approached the wooden gate that separated the herb-planted backyard from the desert wastes beyond, the bleak fields of sagebrush, red cedar and lupin, the craggy stretches filled with unseen raptors and coyotes. The gate, which we had checked so many times and that we had even physically tested, the gate that swung inward, as we both well knew, that was secured by heavy metal bolts that no little dog could shift, that humans could barely shift, and no one had touched it. That gate was now open, wide open. The solid, well-crafted, inward-swinging gate now swung outward. The gate was open outward at least 120-degree angle. The gate splayed open so far that it extended back again, almost against the fence from the outside. Impossibly. A 3-foot opening now yawned. For a little nearsighted dog, that opening would lead straight from the cozy yard into the snake-heavy, thorn-heavy, coyote-hungry, darkening desert. That's the end of part 1. So, shall we stop there, or shall I read part 2? Let me know. If you can stand sequential sections, I'll sign off now or take your questions. And if you can't stand, sequential, not questions, sequential, a story told in sequential parts, I'll sign off now and take your questions. And if you can't, I will go ahead and read part 2. Oh, Vanda Grubb says part 2, please. Stuart Watling says part 2. You have to stay healthy and well at times like this. You know that I often have suffered from mobility issues, and now I don't. Part of my Lifestyle is Native Path Collagen. So Native Path's collagen formula is made with ingredients that are scientifically developed to increase bone mineral density, support tissue recovery, reduce wrinkles, enhance hair thickness, and strengthen nails. Who wouldn't want more collagen with all of these benefits? So right now, when you visit getnativepath.com/daily clout, you can stock up on Native Path collagen for up to an incredible 45% off today, plus free shipping. Every order comes with a 365-day money-back guarantee. You can try it risk-free today. It is a single ingredient formula with no fillers, additives, or artificial sweeteners, and it's third-party tested for heavy metals, which makes sure that it's pure and safe. It's flavorless. You can add it to anything. I add it to my oatmeal. You can add it to coffee or smoothies. Its formula makes it more bioavailable, meaning it's absorbed more easily and mixes without clumping. And the best part is Native Path is offering amazing bundle deals, 3 or 6 packs at a fraction of the price of other brands. With over 4 million jars sold, 1 million happy customers, 8,000 5-star reviews, and a 365-day no-risk guarantee, Native Path is a trusted choice, and they offer an 800 number. You can ask any question. A real person is waiting to help. You can join a private Facebook community. I love these people. Share recipes, success stories. So that's getnativepath.com/daily clout and start your experience of transformation today. All right. When I posted part 1 on Substack, people were very distraught and wanted to know what became of mushrooms. So I will read part 2 now, but part 3 is not yet written. So you guys, I'm just warning you in advance. It's going to be a little bit of a wait. Next week for sure you'll have part 3, but this really happened part 2. And there you can see, thank God Brian took photographs of where we were. That is the fence. There is literally, it's solid, it's tight. There is no way a little dog can escape under or through that fence. And Brian even has a video of the gate, which I'll post in part 3, that shows that it clearly opens only inward. It cannot open outward. So here is This Really Happened part 2. And Jim Van Dorn says, read on. Carmela Leone says, I want part 2. Jim Van Dorn says, mushroom. I know everyone, when people used to ask Mushroom's name, I would say mushroom. He was named by our then 7-year-old daughter. I mean, when she named him, she was 7. And people would always say mushroom, just like that, mushroom. I don't know why. The name just lends itself to that. Carmela Leone says, I love having someone reading me a story. I know, right? We don't read each other's stories anymore. We're wired for it. We're wired to sit around the campfire at the end of the day, hunting and gathering seeds and listening to the storyteller tell the story. All right. Stuart Watling says, thank you. This is so satisfying to me as a writer. This is like a dream come true to read part of a story and have readers say, please keep going in real time. Here we go. The backyard gate was open outward again, impossibly, incomprehensibly. As the shadows continued to descend, our little dog was nowhere to be seen. My heart did not just sink when I gazed out at the terrifying, shadowy desert expanses where Mushroom was most likely to be wandering now, no doubt very frightened, likely disoriented, and perhaps moving always further and further away from safety. My heart did something like suffocate. Then I felt it almost give up beating. I felt absolute despair. In one flash, I saw all of it at once, each one of various equally horrific outcomes. I foresaw having to explain to my children that we had somehow carelessly lost their best friend. I imagined them being forced into the trauma of imagining his last moments. This small being, terrified, unable to see or smell well, perhaps set upon by coyotes or birds of prey. I also realized that if he survived the desert chill tonight, he might die agonizingly over time if we fail to find him from exposure, thirst, or hunger. Brian and I swept into activity. His decades of experience in crisis conditions keep me calmer than I would be otherwise. Brian always takes the lead in deploying a strategy for a given crisis. At first, I used to resist this, but by the time this event took place, I had learned to trust the outcomes, so I immediately fell in to execute his directions. We both could see clearly that Mushroom was nowhere in the backyard. Brian instructed me to close the gate, search the backyard again, then open and close the gate to search the immediate exterior, that is, to go a few yards into the desert, and then to secure the gate again and sweep through the house systematically, going from room to room, moving objects. He did not want me to walk more than a few feet into the desert due to the dangers there. He said he would search outside, at first on foot, and then he would track ever larger circles of surveillance in his truck. He put on his boots, checked his personal firearm, a Glock 40 caliber handgun, holstered it, took an industrial flashlight from the kitchen, and plunged into the darkness. I could see blazing stars above him now, and the black, distant outlines of a barn, and of a few houses against the dim horizon, but soon I could not see him or the flickering beam of his flashlight anymore. I prayed for his safety as well as for Mushroom's. And here you can see an image of the kind of desert, the desert that, that Little Mushroom was facing. Absolutely brutal. Beautiful, but brutal. I did as Brian instructed, but when I stepped a few feet into the desert, I nearly fainted as it was so otherworldly, so terrifying. The distances were now impossible to read beyond the feeble glow cast for a few feet onto stubble and roots and sand and gray-black lupin by the light from the home's interior. I thought of the poet John Milton's phrase, darkness visible. The darkness beyond that little human half circle was now so palpable it was almost velvety, but not in a good way. You could be lost forever in it. You could drown. It wanted to take you. I felt this is what hell is. I could nearly not bear to look, though I had to, at the blackness at the perimeter of my vision. I forced myself, for Mushroom's sake, to do so. In the near distance, I barely made out some more details of the old barn with its opening like an animal's maw. Dangerous, abandoned machinery lay to either side of it. I thought of the 1,000 ways a little dog could be frightened or injured or simply die between where I stood and that ignoble entrance. And there are the stars above the Yakima Desert. Having completed my painful task, I closed and locked the gate. I swept the backyard again carefully, praying to find a living black and white bundle under a bush somewhere that we might have overlooked or snuggled behind garbage cans or hiding under the picnic table. I called Mushroom and called him. Nothing. Praying harder, I went into the house. I forced myself to accomplish the correct human tasks. I called 911. Emergency services told me kindly but firmly to put a lost dog notification on Facebook. I did not blame them. People, no doubt, needed rescue first. I called our hostess on her vacation. She kindly posted pictures of Mushroom that Brian had had the presence of mind to text me onto her Facebook page, one which included the nearby neighbors. Then I searched the house, bedroom, living room, kitchen, kids' rooms, even the bathrooms, the pantries. Nothing. I stood helplessly next to the settee beside the kitchen. I had never prayed harder. God, please bring back my children's pet. Please keep him safe. Please bring him home. I stood half looking out of the sliding doors, intently praying, hoping, and deeply wishing. There is a verb lacking in our language for a maternal wish to nurture, to protect. That was what I was doing, as if by concentrating, I could project around the little dog's body, wherever he was, my love and care. But beyond all that, there was nothing more I could do until I heard from Brian. even as I was aware that I was living out one of the worst moments of my life, made the more excruciating by a sense of guilt. And though technically I understood that I, and far more than I, Mushroom, had everything to fear, I also suddenly felt at the same time that there was nothing to fear. I became aware of a very Old Testament vibration in the living room. I don't know how else to describe it. It was like the feeling of awe and solemn respect one has on the high holy days in synagogue, but it was even deeper and more acute and actually, literally, a vibration. I don't know if the vibration was sound or movement or the synesthesia, the combination of both, but it was as if a mighty engine had switched on in the living room. Or rather, it was as if I was now able to hear a mighty engine that was always present in our world and even beyond it. At first, I even wondered if this was the start of an earthquake. As I became aware of this profound vibration, I had at the same time the overwhelming sense of two immense cylindrical shapes standing side by side, extending somehow past the ceiling. They were vast. The space in which I stood did not physically contain them, and yet I had the definite sense that they were present with me in the space. The energy, the deep vibration seemed to emerge from these shapes. I knew what these were. They were the shapes of a massive Torah scroll, of course, though abstracted and made somehow archetypal. I did not see these massive cylinders, this spiritual engine, literally with my optic nerve. It was not a vision. Rather, I saw them as a presence in the room, as an immense spirit or energy manifesting in the room. But the spirit was not of a being, but in a sense, it was of the text itself. This was the engine of the law. And above all, from this event, this presence, I felt, do not worry, all will be well. And so, strangely, I stopped worrying. I remained alert and kept looking, kept reacting and checking my phone, but somehow I was at peace. Then eventually this manifestation faded. Then, after what seemed like hours, I began to hear faintly from beyond the yard, the barking of a little dog. I raced out to the backyard. I heard it barking. Mushroom, I called. A bark. Was it he or another animal? Mushroom, stay there. I shouted myself hoarse. Mushroom. A dog's high-pitched yelp barked back at me. I needed to keep shouting so he could keep hearing me, so he could draw closer to us, so he would not get more lost if that was indeed Mushroom. Wondering if I should risk leaving the backyard, where at least I was hearing the barking. To check if I could see anything in the street, I made a quick decision, unsure if it would be the right one. My heart pounded. I raced to the front of the house and flung open the door. Mushroom, I cried every few seconds. Mushroom! I hoped Brian would come back. I thought I should phone him to tell him about the barking. But the suburban street in front of me was completely empty. There was silence now. No barking at all. My spirit collapsed. Then I saw Brian. What on earth was he doing? He raced on foot from the left of the scene to the right. He had no little dog in his arms. I was so confused. I was nearly angry. Why was he here? Why was he running? We were duplicating efforts by our both being in the same location. He should still be out in the city driving, looking for Mushroom. I shouted to him that I had heard barking. He uncharacteristically ignored me and kept on running. He was completely focused on something that appeared to be down the street. But I could not see anything unusual. The street was totally empty. Brian stopped running. To my incomprehension, he paused on the sidewalk, standing now at right angles to the house. He seemed to be in conversation, but there was no one else there. He was alone. I called to him again. He gestured to me without glancing my way, still intently talking or listening to what? that I should wait. I could make sense of none of this. Was he talking to himself? Brian is the most logical person on earth. He does not imagine things that are not there. He does not lose touch with the material world. That just does not happen. I did not understand what I was witnessing. I was sad and baffled and went inside. And I could no longer hear any barking. All was lost. A few minutes later, Brian called to me urgently to open the door. He stood there, breathing with exertion and glowing with joy. I took a moment to be sure I was not imagining anything. A perfectly unharmed mushroom lounged nonchalantly in Brian's arms. In the midst of my indescribable joy, a part of me was still at sea. With whom, with what, had Brian been conversing? That is the end of part 2. I can't give away the ending yet, but I will with the 3rd installment. Do you have questions, comments? Are you cozy and happy and settled in for the night now that you've had a story read to you, 2/3 of a story? Vonda Grubb says, oh, I love this. Thank you. And other than that, I don't have questions or comments, or they're not coming through just now. Oh, Carmela Leon says, when is the 3rd installment? I have to write it. And I can write it and post it by Friday. I can promise by Friday. Looking forward to part 3. Lovely story. Thank you, says Stuart Watling. Thank you. By Friday, I can finish it. You deserve it. And if you can't wait till next Wednesday, I can do a podcast with part 3. And I can tell you who Brian was speaking to, even though I never saw anyone that he was speaking to. But I'll just give it a little teaser and say that as trippy and imponderable and inexplicable as my experience was, Brian's was even more inexplicable and mind-blowing and incredible, and involved alterations of physical dimensions. So I should probably stop there and leave it there. But I guess maybe I can say a little bit about the first 2 installments. I used to not even want to think that there was anything beyond the material world, or I've always kind of believed in God, but God wasn't represented in formal religion that I was exposed to in a very approachable way. Those of you who are following the Geneva Bible readings with me know that the God in the Hebrew text and in the Geneva Bible is totally different from the version of God that we get in modern translations. Much nicer, cozier, more approachable, more like us, better sense of humor, much, deeply involved in our everyday lives, wanting to be close to us, deeply loving, deeply forgiving, no intermediaries needed ever. You can always have God, right? That's in the Hebrew text and in the Geneva Bible, but that's been kind of written out of pretty much every modern or post King James Bible on translation. That's my thesis in every reading from the Geneva Bible and the Hebrew Bible backs that up and gives more evidence of that. All that to say, I never used to want to talk about the miraculous kind of intermingling with our daily lives. I also had not that many experiences of it, except that from time to time, like any, poet or mystic, not that I call myself a mystic, but, I think 2/3 of people have had mystical experiences, according to some polls. So I think they're pretty common human experiences, but in certain moments, I would certainly see, as Wordsworth says, see into the heart of things, or as Blake says, see the world in a grain of sand in heaven and a wildflower. And that kind of, everything lights up. Mystical vision, you see that it's all heaven, it's all, imbued with the divine. It's all right here. It's all the kingdom of heaven right here, like it's not far away. The world is a miracle. But I didn't want to talk about it, right? I mean, as I said in this essay, I really was raised to believe that, people who are intellectuals are not supposed to have a spiritual life, and they're not supposed to see the miraculous or talk about the miraculous, which is ridiculous because there have been great intellectuals who talk about nothing else. I mean, Emily Dickinson to Walt Whitman to, Bonhoeffer, I mean, Milton, I mean, on and on and on. It's a very 20th century, 21st century bias that an intellectual isn't supposed to talk about God or the spirit or metaphysics, let alone the miraculous. You're only supposed to acknowledge the material world, the post-Enlightenment, mechanical, kind of Newtonian world. So even though I've had experiences not like this was a mind blower, right? But I've had like little baby mystical experiences at various times in my life that I'm becoming more open about. And then people say, so did I, right? So, it's like being a member of AA, right? It turns out everyone's in AA, right? It turns out everyone's had mystical experiences. We're just not supposed to talk about it in this culture. Other cultures talk about it all day long, like in India, no big deal, right? Mystical experiences, of course, right? But same with communities, Orthodox communities in Israel, or probably much of the Muslim world, people all over the world, people in the Christian West until the Enlightenment, right? Talked about the miraculous and, went to see relics that had miraculous powers and prayed for miracles. I mean, this was part of the human condition until very recently. But I didn't want to be public about it because it's a lot of reasons. I spent 35 years establishing a reputation as a serious public intellectual. And especially if you're a woman, it's, you really want to be serious, right? You really want to be taken seriously. And so if you deviate from that Newtonian worldview at all, it's very easy to lose status and credibility. That was one reason. Of course, now that I've been canceled, I have nothing to lose and I get to talk about whatever I want, which is very liberating. But yeah, the other reason is like weirdly the social status of the world that I was ejected from, as you know, in 2021, when I was deplatformed from Twitter and Facebook and everywhere for telling the truth about menstrual damage from the mRNA injections. I was in a world, my whole career, my whole life, that is very self-reinforcing because liberal elites on both coasts kind of police each other. And if you deviate, and it's not like a conscious thing or a stated thing, it's just how society works. But if you deviate from, pretty narrow guardrails of what we're sort of allowed to talk about or views that we're allowed to express without being ostracized and rejected, if you deviate, you get ostracized and rejected. And along with that, like there's more to lose, right? Like it's a self-policing system because that network is so valuable and people hire each other and give each other, book contracts and promote each other and help each other professionally if they're aligned, right, ideologically. And if they're not aligned ideologically, if you're not aligned ideologically, you risk losing all of that access. And so you don't consciously think, gee, I really don't want to lose my cultural capital or my social capital, so I'll, censor myself. But it really comes down to that in some ways. I mean, I'm hearing from so many conservatives, for instance, in this world, like secret conservatives who literally don't express their real, views because they're in very liberal environments or liberal elite environments in which that's just not tolerated. They'll lose clients, they'll lose professional associations. I mean, so much loss. So all of that to say, big picture, you know, these are our thought leaders. And so big picture, we're living in a very secular society that didn't used to be secular. You know, people used to, America used to be all about, you know, people having a devotional life, people having a community, prayer life, church life, synagogue life. You know, in the 19th century, I mean, the Puritans used to keep journals of their, you know, scrutinizing their soul, you know, day by day. I mean, in the 19th century, you know, women kept journals and diaries and wrote letters about their, you know, prayer life, their devotional life, their Bible readings. It was there were revivals, you know, those of you who know American history know there were great revivals. There was a great awakening in the 1830s. People went crazy with like giant tents with preachers and just outdoor worship. I mean, Martha's Vineyard actually started as a kind of summer prayer camp kind of location. I mean, it did. The whole island didn't start that way, but one part of it did, as a community. And that was America. And so big picture, it's very interesting to me that in just 2 or 3 generations, you know, the post-war world on, God got kind of scrubbed, you know, from our public life, and certainly the miraculous and the metaphysical got scrubbed from what we were allowed to talk about. In retrospect, I think that was intentional. You know, Brian and our friend Josh Stylman have both persuaded me that there's a lot of manipulating of our culture going on through forces that are trying to, you know, weaken us and break us. And obviously our spiritual life is a source of strength, especially in America, where it's, you know, freedom of conscience, right? We don't tell you whom to worship. But I think two or 3 generations on, we're worse off for it, partly because, you know, it's a form of censorship. Like, we don't talk about these things. So that's my rant. I've now talked about this, these things that are not understandable. That gate, you'll see, I'll post the video. It could not open out, but it opened out. You know, it didn't open out. It was designed to open inward, but it opened out. There's no way to explain it. You know, it was imponderable, incomprehensible. The person that Brian was talking to, as you will learn, inexplicable, incomprehensible. The distances that Brian covered don't make sense. And then I'm going to foreshadow a little bit. After all of this transpired, a neighbor told us that things like that, impossible to understand things, happened in that area a lot, you know, a lot. Like, it was probably like a sacred area, in some ways of which we were not aware. But a neighbor actually told the story of another neighbor who was right there, like a physical person that we could check this story with, had been in a serious car accident on that street. Her car wrapped around a tree. She woke up unharmed in her bed. You know, she woke up, the tree was still wrapped. I'm sorry, the car was still wrapped around the tree, but somehow she woke up unharmed in her bed. So that there was some sort of vortex of, you know, the extraordinary going on in that area. Who knows why? But I will tell you part 3 by Friday, and I'll post it by Friday. I'll read it by next Wednesday. And if you really can't wait till next Wednesday, I'll read it on Friday too, because I don't want to keep you hanging. I know that's very cruel, but I can only write so fast. So this has been my storytelling hour. They won't always be stories. Sometimes they'll be interviews, or we'll go through the news together, or I'll read other essays, political commentary, cultural commentary. But this is Outspoken, the Substack Live show. We're on Substack Live. I've shared this with you. I hope you enjoyed it. Jim Van Dorn says, thank you. I've been too busy to think about this part of my life. You're not canceled to me. You're validating all our thoughts and feelings. Great rant. Thank you. That really means so much to me. It's a risk, right? But I appreciate you telling me that. And Carmela Leona says, thank you for sharing. I look forward to hearing more. James Green says, I feel I can say that I found that human ethical regard was as yet affordable going into the 70s and 80s. That is true. I agree with that. It was definitely, by the turn of the century, something changed. But yeah, people could talk ethics. They were supposed to talk ethics, as I recall in college, the 70s into the 80s. The 70s were a crazy time, right? Some people were talking ethics and some were doing coke. But I take your point. Net Hunter says, lovely story. I look forward to part 3. And that is it for now. So if you like this, please subscribe to me on Substack. The Substack is called Outspoken. The podcast is called Outspoken. And you can also find me over on dailyclout.io. We'll post this there as well. And if you want to support this kind of work, of course, becoming a founding member or a paying subscriber is a great help to me, freeing me up from other tasks so I can devote myself to this and you. And if you can't afford to, things are tight. Everything is free over there anyway. There's no paywall. But if you do support me, you are making it possible for me to keep that paywall down for everyone to hear these stories, these essays, the interviews, my reporting on natural remedies, which I do over on Outspoken, how to keep you out of the hands of allopathic medicine if possible. I'm not a medical doctor, don't arrest me, but that's something we explore over on Outspoken, and also the 1560 Geneva Bible. So it's an eclectic mix, but very fun, and it's so wonderful to talk to you live. I love you all, my wonderful readers. I prefer readers to followers, which always seemed a little bit of a weird power imbalance. But I love you all. There's nothing like beautiful readers like you. You make my heart very happy, and I can't wait to talk to you next week. Thank you so much, everybody. See you soon.